You can find this next award-winning cast member performing all over the East Coast. Go and check out his website, michaelmack.com, for future performances and information on his one-man shows. He is also selling a book in the lobby called Homework, which you can purchase after the show. I first met Michael back in 2015. I was the director of a show in Boston, and our audition space for the day was in a rickety old dance studio in Cambridge. We were in a studio on the bottom floor with a bevy of tap dancers above us doing their best and stompiest routines on the paper-thin floor. It was most definitely not optimum for the auditioners who were pouring their hearts out to us. And for me, the anxiety that caused was beyond distracting. But all that changed when Michael walked in. He was a presence right from hello. All that I could hear, all that I could see was Michael and his exquisite performance. I cannot think of a more perfect way to end the essay portion of our show than to share that performance with all of you. Ladies and gentlemen, Michael Mack performing by heart.
When I was 5 years old, my mom was diagnosed with schizophrenia. And this was at a time long before recovery became part of the common currency. My dad called it a kind of death sentence. And back in the 1960s, the 1970s, the 1980s, the life that my mom lived was a life very typical of someone with a major mental illness, in and out of home, in and out of state hospitals, halfway houses, group homes, in jails, or even living on the streets of Washington and Baltimore. But in the late 80s, she did come into her recovery through her social workers and through a couple of really outstanding group homes. I've always known my mom very closely. We've always been close. And so I thought she had told me everything that she could tell me. But in the last year of her life, when she was 72, she told me something that changed my thinking completely about her life, about her illness, and about her recovery. That's what this poem is about, and my reflections on it. And I will follow it by giving to you, word for word, exactly what she gave to me. This is called By Heart. In the last year of her life, I learned from my aged mother a fact I never knew. Not secret so much as simply unrevealed. A scrap, perhaps, retained from grade school and shared with me one June evening with the offhand grace of a tossed cigarette. She recited the Gettysburg Address by heart. Now this for some might not amaze, but for me, who as a child saw my mother's mind stormed by the devil engine of psychosis, I who witnessed her ricochet in and out of mental hospitals, electroshock, a galaxy of medications that left her ragged and mute. I who heard her mouth by rote only Sinatra lyrics and prayers, I sat dumbstruck as this tiny woman's carbonated smoker's voice shaped Lincoln's most famous speech. She sat bent in a deck chair on the front porch of her group home and recited suddenly, no preamble, no pause, as if she'd practiced all her life. Perhaps she had, born 40 miles from Gettysburg in Columbia, Pennsylvania, not 77 years ago, but at 72, close enough for me to imagine her life as a kind of great battlefield. Schizophrenia, a great civil war, reminding me that the proposition that all men are created equal has not often included the desolate citizens of mental illness. Her delivery, incantatory, like a mantra, muttered to herself through every decade prior, in state hospital wards, jail cells, courthouses, and halfway houses, or shouted at the White House when homeless on the streets of D.C. At the words, "From these honored dead we take increased devotion," I imagine the tens of thousands of mental patients before her who died, locked up, forgotten, nameless, and these words her call to the unfinished work of finding in their memory a purpose, that these dead shall not have died in vain. She closed her textbook circuit of the Gettysburg Address with a drag on her cigarette. My mother, in that last year, became a celebrity in her group home. Asked to recite at the dinner table or for guests at parties, she would comply. Eyes cast down to a faraway point on the floor, her monotone relentless, but in its strict march to the end, more true, giving the last full measure of devotion in this portrait of her life's work, in finding, I prayed, in the spill of applause, a new birth of freedom. If the world will little note nor long remember this poem I share here, let's remember now my mother on a porch one summer evening, the stem of a Pall Mall cigarette trembling in her fingers as she recites for us, the living, the Gettysburg Address by heart. Fourscore and 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here have consecrated it far beyond our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note nor long remember what they say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, rather, the living, to be here dedicated to the unfinished work, which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, and this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for all the people, shall not perish from the earth. Amen.